Hello, everybody. My name's Amanda Tosoff.
And I'm Jody Prosnick, and we are two-thirds of the Music Education Club, a club hub,
It's a
Music
club.
Arts Collective. It's also a club, for sure. The other one-third is our wonderful executive director, Francesca Fong. She can't be with us today, but she will tune in and chat with you in your messages or any comments you have later. So we're going to say hello from her. And if you are tuning in, you can just comment on where you're tuning in from. If it's anywhere else outside the Greater Toronto or Greater Vancouver area, we would love to know that. Yeah, so Amanda, here we are again, back at it.
We're back at it. This is the first of our season, starting October 3rd. Here we are. We've actually been doing this series. I think it's number 17. We've been doing it since we formed Music Arts Collective back in last September. And we've had some amazing special guests. We've had Celine Peterson, Emily Claire Barlow, Lila Bialy, Heather Bambrick, my childhood hero, Rini Rosnes, and so many wonderful guests. And we've had some really wonderful conversations. So if you haven't checked them out, they are up on YouTube. So you can head over to our YouTube and watch them if you like. We also have a whole series of workshops that we did last year that are recorded and available on our site, so you can go check that out. And we have our very first workshop of this season coming up on October 17th. It's going to be a how to play piano in a jazz ensemble for beginners and intermediate students. So feel free to go to our website. I'll post the links shortly, and you can check out what we've been up to this last year and what we're going to be up to this year. Um, yeah, so here we are with our
Here we
first.
are. And
Yeah.
today we're super excited because we have the award-winning composer, band leader, saxophone player, pianist, arranger, curator, and more recently, lawyer, Phil Dwyer. And he's going to be our guest today to explore his life in music. Some questions. We're going to chat about the idea of mentorship. We're going to talk about some of his go-to albums that were inspiring to him, and then talk about his new life as a lawyer on Vancouver Island and how there's some interesting parallels between being an artist and a musician, and in particular a jazz musician, and being in the courtroom. So that'll be interesting. So let me just tell you a little bit about Phil. For those of you who don't know Phil Dwyer, you need to find out about him and go go to all your favorite places to listen to music and go listen to him because you will hear a lot of good stuff. So I think probably most notably, he was appointed as a member of the Order of Canada, and he was cited in that award as and celebrated for his contributions to jazz as a performer, composer, and producer, and for increasing access to music education in his community. When he moved home to Vancouver Island, he started a workshop in and around the Qualicum area and in his home. And I was part of it one year, and it was just a beautiful, amazing experience. I think Amanda was as well.
It
So
was, yes.
we've known Phil for a long time. So in 2015, he was recognized by the Royal Conservatory of Music as an Honorary Fellow. And he's, been part of the music scene in Canada and beyond for 30 years and collaborated with literally, like, when you scroll who he's played with, it's like pages and pages and pages and pages of the who's who of music. All styles from all over the world. He's appeared on 10 Juno Award-winning recordings and over 30 nominated recordings. And he's also the recipient of the prestigious K.M. Hunter Prize for Excellence in the Arts. And now he is a practicing lawyer in Qualicum Beach with his own firm. And he's working primarily in family, estate, and environmental law. And he's going to talk a little bit about a recent case he was involved in that was a very high profile case here on the west coast of Canada. And he's also like a very big advocate for mental health and wellness. He's an avid gardener and chef. And yeah, he's just an amazing person. And I have to tell you, oh, well, the last thing is to go and check out. He has a curated playlist on CBC Radio. It's called Phil Dwyer's Jazz Canada. He curates a concert series at the Old Schoolhouse in Qualicum Beach. He also is a partner in Seawind Musical Instruments. And so he is an incredibly accomplished, amazing human. And I can say on behalf of Amanda and I, one of the people we both look up to so much as a mentor and guide and inspiration of how much a wholehearted life can accomplish. And when you're following your heart and doing good quality work all the way along. So let's bring on Mr. Phil Dwyer.
Hi.
Welcome, Phil. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you. That was very touching.
Aw, well, you are important to us, very, very important to us, and to many, many musicians. But I always quote you when people are asking me about my life's choices. And I say, one of the big pieces of advice you gave to me years ago when we were doing that wonderful tour together, I said, this is like the best tour ever, Phil. And you looked at me and you said, the key is to curate your life well. and I was like, oh, that is deep. That is so good. So I have that written at the top of lots of journal entries. Curate your life well, curate your life well. And so thanks for that.
Well, yeah. And I mean, a big part of that is having the, wisdom or luck to surround yourself with the right people.
Yes.
And to be able to draw on those, on their strengths. And, you certainly don't get much done on your own.
100%. That's the truth. Yeah.
Absolutely. So one of the things we love to start with when we're chatting with our guests is your whole life story, your musical background. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you got into music, how you found jazz, and just how you got into this world.
Well, it may be a different path than some. When I was very young, my family lived on a float camp up on the sort of the mid coast of British Columbia, and it was like a logging camp that where most of the buildings were on floats and anchored to shore. And then the logging would take place, obviously, where it took place. But and there would be equipment would be barged in and that sort of thing. And my dad was running a logging camp in Princess Louisa Inlet, and so there was obviously not much access to music there. But he bought a reel-to-reel tape recorder from a guy. There was a merchant called Ted Goldblum who used to come up the coast on his boat and sell suits and dry goods and records. And my dad bought a Sony reel-to-reel from him and had quite a good collection of reel-to-reel, like half-inch tape, which was a commercial format in those days. But he'd also taped himself onto blank reels his entire collection of 78s and 45s. And he did it, I don't know if you know this or not, but those reel-to-reel tapes, you could run them at 3 different speeds. It was 7.5 inches per second was the high resolution speed, but you could go half that and then half again. And if you ran it at the slowest speed, which my math is correct, it may have been like 1 7/8 inch per second, I forget, but slow, you could get about 4 hours of music onto a reel. And so he had these reels of tape which had a lot of music on them, and he would just record them by holding up a couple of microphones to the speakers on his turntable. And so when I was very young, I got introduced that tape recorder was, in some respects, was my babysitter. Of course, my mom was there too, but she was also working as the camp nurse and quite often as the camp cook,
Mm.
and um, and doing regular stuff around the house. And so I was listening to Fats Waller and Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong, Dave Brubeck, uh, Oscar Peterson, Count Basie Orchestra, all music which my dad had collected when he was younger, and so that's where those sounds got into my brain, and and then when we moved down to Qualicum, I guess when I was 5 or 6, uh, we always had music on around the house, and then when I started doing little jobs around the community for money, mowing lawns and that sort of thing, I started collecting records, and so in addition to the music we had around the house already, which was mostly swing era and classic New Orleans style stuff like Louis Armstrong, Hot Five,
Mhm.
West End blues, those sorts of things, and then Ellington at Newport, albums like that. Lots of Oscar Peterson trio, quite a bit of George Shearing,
Mm.
um, and then I started collecting records on my own, just based on what I heard on those other albums. And I thought, oh, I like this Lester Young guy. He's on this Count Basie record, so I'm going to try to find more things with him on it. Or Johnny Hodges was the first, kind of my first saxophone uh, person that I really latched onto,
Mhm.
and I still a source of amazement what he did.
Mhm.
And yeah, so Hodges, Ben Webster, Paul Gonsalves, people like that, Lester Young, um, Herschel Evans,
Mm.
and then my dad was a big trumpet guy. He loved trumpet players, and so we listened to lots of Harry James and Buck Clayton and Bunny Berrigan.
Mhm.
Um, but it was all. I feel fortunate in my introduction to jazz music was all it was essentially all music that had a really strong emphasis on the swing element, very clear, rhythmic, and very melodic content, singable.
Mhm. Mhm.
It was
Mhm. Mhm.
most of those solos you hear on those records, they're very singable, they're very melodic, they're not
Mhm.
coming out of a theoretical approach. It's more really melodically derived. So for my young ears, it was relatively easy to pick up little phrases here and there and sort
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
develop my sense of playing in that style. I
Mhm.
think if the first thing you heard was Charlie Parker playing Coco,
Mhm.
or John Coltrane playing Moment's Notice or something
Mhm.
like that, it wouldn't sound like much. But by the time I got into hearing that kind of music, I had 7 or 8 years under my belt of hearing the music that led up to that. So,
Right. That's a huge, huge distinction. I always talk to students about like first transcriptions, like where to start, because I know for me that when I heard like really technical, really challenging solos as a young bass player, I just went, well, that's never going to happen. But if you start like, oh, if you go to Jimmy Blanton or Oscar Pettiford, those Milt Hinton, it's like, oh, I can kind of hear what they're doing. So we always start back there because it does feel like even Paul Chambers, some of can get a little technical, but there's stuff that's like you can learn this line, relatively quickly in your earlier years and feel like, oh, I'm getting somewhere with this. So I think that's a really interesting point, Phil, that you started with that early stuff. the singable stuff,
Hmm.
because I think it can feel a little like, whoa, overwhelming if you start with more modern players and, like, what is it that they're doing? But it's all coming from somewhere. So
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. So like to pick a few little phrases out of a Count Basie
Yeah.
thing it's relatively speaking, it's quite simple, but
Mm-hmm.
every note's perfect, and if you
Mm-hmm.
could, you play along with that, and you're playing along with Walter Page and Joe
Yeah.
Jones,
Yeah.
or Sonny Payne and Eddie
Yeah.
Jones, or whoever it is. I mean, you're getting that feel, and everything you play is right in the pocket. I didn't.
Amazing.
I it barely dawned on me until I'd been playing for quite a long time that Oscar Peterson was playing the same kind of piano that I was.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, well, he must have a different kind of piano that does that stuff because the one I couldn't there was no world that I could conceive of where
I
the
know.
the thing that I had in front of me did that.
I know.
Like, it didn't make any
Yeah. Oh
sense. I
yeah.
mean, it still kind of doesn't
No,
really,
it's still like,
but
how is that even possible? I don't know.
yeah, but when I heard Wynton Kelly's solo on Freddie the Freeloader,
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't figure it all out right away, but 70% of it kind of
Mm-hmm.
made sense to me. Well, yeah, that's sort of like in that same. I could relate that to Count Basie and relate
Mm-hmm.
it to
Mm-hmm.
Teddy Wilson and people like that. I could see that. Whereas Oscar, I hadn't really heard Art Tatum at that point, so I had nothing to. I had no understanding of where that virtuosic kind of thing came from. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I feel lucky in
Mm.
that I came to that music sort of on my own terms. It wasn't like somebody was trying to beat me over the head with, "Oh, you got to go back and listen to the
Yeah.
thing," and because you're never going to listen to it the same way as you do if it's just a choice that you make on your own, or it
Mm.
just sort of falls into your lap. I mean, um, couldn't be much luckier, really. I feel like I'm
Mm-hmm.
should have been an additional chapter in that Malcolm Gladwell book about um, how Bill Gates came to learn how to program computers. There's all these fluky things just fell
Yep.
into place, and that was sort
Yep.
of like that for me. Just all these random fluky things just fell
Mhm.
into place that allowed me to move forward in that.
I also think it's really important to point out that environment, like the idea that, people just it comes to them and they just kind of come out able to do all this amazing stuff. But those formative years, just with the sounds around your environment, and you happen to have a dad that happened to have these records and happened to put them on this reel to reel, and that sort of accidental beautiful like fertilizer for your future life, I think is something important to point out, because I think some people feel like, wow, that person is so much farther ahead than me at this point. But oftentimes, I mean, I grew up with a parent that was, well, both Manda and I both have musician parents. So
Yeah,
that was helpful. That was beneficial to the environment we grew up in, was music, music, music. So, it's not just like this is accidental. It's so much about, as you were saying earlier, that it takes a village to, and like certain uh, culture or community to raise an artist or raise anything, at a high level, I
sure.
think. So
Yeah,
that's fantastic. Well, I want
yeah.
to move from those formative years on Vancouver Island, and let's just ask some questions about. So you grew up in Qualicum, and then you moved to, was it New York first or Toronto first? And like, so what
Yeah.
happened after you graduate high school and you head off out east?
Well, I had spent the last, I guess, my last year and a half or so of high school, and the summer after high school, was spending a lot of time in Vancouver,
Mm-hmm.
and joined the union and was doing pro gigs, working
Mm-hmm.
for different people in the city,
Mm-hmm.
and then it was actually Donnie Clark who made me aware that there was a thing called a Canada Council grant, and and at the time there wasn't nearly as competitive for getting those, obviously, and so I put a tape together. I made a tape, recorded a gig I did at Basin Street. You guys wouldn't have
Yeah.
been around then, but you've
Yeah.
probably heard about it.
Heard about it? Yeah.
And I recorded a gig I did at Basin Street with Hugh Fraser and Rudy Petschauer and a bass player, Mike Lent. And
Oh, Mike. Yeah, from
yeah.
Edmonton. Yeah.
And so Rudy just recorded that on his Sony Pro Walkman, and I picked the best 3 tunes and sent that in with my resume at the time, which was non-existent. I mean, I'd had some high school stuff, but whatever. But I had put in a proposal to take some lessons with Dave Liebman and Lee Konitz, and I had met Lee at the Banff Center in the summer of 1982, and I graduated in '83. So then I went down to New York for a while. That was like 1983 through '85, around that time, and studied and played gigs, and I when I was down there, I was sort of kind of caught the just sort of the tail end of when all the a lot of the real legends of the music, like the really founding figures of especially of the hard bop generation, but even preceding that, people that I'd heard on records that might have played on 1 or 2 albums that were from the 1950s that were great players, never really got famous, but there's a piano player I think of, Gil Coggins, who played on some early Miles Davis albums. But there were also people around like Philly Joe Jones and Art Blakey was still around, and lots of people, Walter Davis Jr., Walter Bishop, Junior Cook, Bill Hardman, Tommy Turrentine, and Barry Harris is still around. But he was really in his prime and operating the Jazz Cultural Theater, which was around I'm gonna say 9th Avenue and 28th Street. So it was sort of in the kind of the west side there. It was like a drop-in center for itinerant musicians, and he would give classes there, and get to hear him play with people like Charles McPherson, and Clarence Sharp was another great player that I got to hang out with a lot and learn from. And so that was and then there were those, and then there were like the young and up and coming musicians. So I was going and listening to Marcus Miller when he was just sort of, before he was really Marcus Miller, he was just starting to do the stuff with Miles and really getting his rep going, and Al Foster and a lot of the musicians that we think of as being the elder statespeople of the music now, like Kenny Barron and John Hicks and those vintage of people, and Al Foster, Billy Hart, they were younger than I am now by a fair ways, and most of them, and they were the local players out playing all the gigs, and Cedar Walton. I heard Cedar Walton's band with Bob Berg and Billy Higgins a bunch of times.
Wow.
And, Bobby Hutcherson and Sphere with Charlie Rouse and Joe Henderson. Like, it was just crazy. Seventh Avenue South was happening, and I heard the Bob Minster Big Band with Mike Brecker and Dave Sanborn and Will Lee and Peter Erskine and Don Grolnick, and it's just crazy. So that was kind of what I jumped into from high school, and it was phenomenal, needless to say, to be able to be around that kind of greatness. And so my playing and my understanding of music took a big, went straight up during those couple of years, and I'd never lived on my own. I didn't really have much in the way of life skills. So, being able to stay down there and try to pursue a career wasn't really an option. So after a couple of years, I came back to Canada, and then I moved to Toronto shortly after that.
Hmm. Amazing. Well, what a time though. Like it's almost like a university degree in the clubs or something.
Yeah.
Just being
No, I
around all of that, all of those amazing musicians and soaking it up
yeah,
and observing and, you know, listening and chatting and learning
yeah.
and studying. And it's amazing. What an amazing time. So,
Hmm.
can you tell us a little bit about, so you moved to Toronto and that's where things really, in terms of your career and all the opportunities really exploded for you. Um, and do you want to talk about a little bit about your time in Toronto? Because you were so prolific. I mean, you were on so many studio sessions and so much session work and writing and so how did that happen for you? Like, was it just you got there and things exploded right away? Was there a process? Were there people who sort of opened doors for you there? What was it? Yeah. How did things start moving once you got there?
Well, when I first moved, it didn't explode right away because in Toronto. Well, Amanda, you would know because you've been there for a while now, and and, and I in my estimation, anyways, I would say that you've arrived at a place in Toronto where you're universally respected and everybody likes you you're a Toronto musician now. You've gotten to that place, but uh, you have to admit it doesn't happen right away, does it? And it doesn't really matter um, who you are, or how good you are, or how good you aren't. You do have to put in some time to work your way through the roster, because if you're a saxophone player and you're moving to Toronto, you can be pretty darn good, but you're still competing for gigs with Kirk McDonald and Pat LaBarbera and Mike Murley and Perry White and Kelly Jefferson and Louis Dennis, and I mean the list goes on, right? So it doesn't mean to be you can be pretty happening, and it doesn't mean that people are going to stop calling Kelly Jefferson because he's pretty happening too, and he's been playing in your band for the last 10 years. So you don't just land on that nice work. That said, I did have the benefit of knowing a couple of people who gave me a big leg up,
Mm.
and that always helps. So I knew Jerry Fuller,
Mm.
who was very in demand, and people had a tremendous amount of respect for Jerry's opinion about other musicians, because Jerry was a very opinionated and picky guy, and he had really high standards about what he wanted, who he wanted to be on a gig with. And so if you were recommended by Jerry, that really went a long way to
Mm.
giving you some credibility. And another person that really helped me out a lot was Arnie Tchaikovsky.
Mm.
And similarly, I mean, Arnie was universally revered, and if you had the Arnie Tchaikovsky stamp of approval, that went a long way as well. And and there was another guy, Aaron Davis, who was very popular in recording and sort of the fusion and doing a lot of CBC work. And I knew Aaron, and he helped me get things going. But the person that was really critical to my getting integrated into the Toronto music scene, or maybe not integrated into the music scene so much as just somebody who um, recognized me, and by the fact that I played with them, it gave me credibility, was Don Thompson.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
and so I'd met Don at Banff, and we hit it off right away, and really developed a certain kinship. And so by the time I moved to Toronto in sort of towards the close to the end of 1987 or so, Don and I had already played a lot. And we'd done a bunch of
Yeah.
gigs, and we'd played in Vancouver. We did some gigs with Claude and
Yeah.
Renee Wurst.
Renee, we love Renee.
Yeah, that were really,
Seriously.
really, really happening, and
Mhm.
and we'd done a bunch of stuff together. So when I moved to Toronto, I became the saxophone player in Don Thompson's band, whatever band that was at the time, and that remained the
Huge.
case. Yeah, and that
Yeah.
stayed the whole time I was in Toronto. That was the case, and then so those were people that really helped me get my foot in the door. And then as I got into more different kinds of stuff, Doug Riley was another person that
Mhm, mhm,
really helped me out a lot, and Guido Basso,
mhm,
Dave Young,
mhm.
some senior musicians on the scene that give you a lot of cred. If you're getting a call from any of those people, other people take notice of that, and it really helps.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as far as the writing and stuff, it was just something I was interested in, and I guess it was a combination of being a little bit cocky and having a certain amount of blissful ignorance about how much I didn't know about what I was doing.
I wish I had some of that.
Because
Oh,
I would insert myself into. I would propose things to people like, "How about you get me to do this?" And just by my enthusiasm and they. I guess people would thought, well, maybe he knows how to do that, and I didn't actually really know how to do it at all. But I would, and then I would go about the process of learning
learning.
as quickly as I could, and really using every resource I had at my disposal to try to learn how to do something like trying to learn how to write for strings, or learn how to do any kind of arranging, or
Yeah.
just sort of picking it up. You can't beat lived experience.
No.
You can take arranging courses in school for 50 years,
Mhm.
and until you've had that experience of writing a chart and having it played and having two bars in the middle really sound terrible,
Yes.
and then figuring out why,
Mm-hmm.
and then putting that on the list of things that you're never going to do again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That it's really hard to make progress.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I've had the fortune to have, and I've had enough experience to have a healthy respect for my limits. But I've also had enough experience that I can still enjoy the process, and still, really enjoy the fact that I get to learn every time I write a chart. I learn something from it, and try to do it better next time. And I haven't done it enough that I have any kind of a formula, or really, and I don't have a system. It's still very much flying by the seat of my pants when I'm doing any of that kind of thing. So it's still, there's the thrill of the chase is still there.
So it sounds like you're very process orientated. So you get involved in the process, you do the thing, and then do you ever just sit back and delight in what you've made, or are you kind of on to the next thing? Like, are you always like, okay, that was okay? Or do you I'm just curious, because I know the creative process for some people can be so, and you make the thing and you're like, is this any good? I don't know. But you seem to be just so, you generate so much stuff, and it's such high quality stuff. I mean, I know I've played a couple of your arrangements you recently wrote for the string thing with Corey, and I mean, they're so beautiful, and and your album, of course, with Mark Viewer, which is like stunning, beautiful. And so I'm just curious if you like how you navigate that. I don't really know this. I've done this. Do you not care, or do you care just enough and then you're on to the next thing? Yeah.
Oh, I
I
care a
don't know if my
lot.
question is making sense, but
Yeah, no, I think I understand what you're
hmm
getting at, Jody. I I learned I learned the hard way, and it took me an unfortunately long time to learn this, and I would hope that most people would not take as long as I did.
mm,
That I had to be kind to myself,
mm,
uh, generally,
hmm
but especially in regard to my music, what I did in music, because regardless of what we might be told or what might be an ideal, you if you're a musician like we all are, like to the extent that we all are, it's really hard to remove how you do in music with how you're doing as a person.
hmm
Yeah.
You can say, well, it's not a reflection on anything, but that's not that's an ideal that's really hard to measure up to.
hmm
um,
hmm
or maybe it's not, but it was for me.
Hmm.
um, I found it very difficult, and so I spent a lot of years being very hard on myself, and that created all kinds of collateral issues because of how
hmm
I dealt with that. And it
hmm
wasn't healthy, and it wasn't productive, and it wasn't really useful to anybody. So
hmm
um, um, Ted Quinlan told me my problem was I just had to lower my standards. but but uh, that that was that could be a short term fix, but that wasn't going to be a good long term solution. So I had to learn how to be kind to myself, and be accepting, and say,
hmm
well, that's what I did, and I can't change that. And so I realized that the goal for me was to be able to say, that's what I did, and it was the result of me putting the best and most sincere effort
hmm
into it that I was capable of at the time.
At the time.
Yeah.
hmm
And if the answer to that was yes, that was the best effort I could put into it, um, at the time, given the totality of the circumstances,
hmm
then I could learn to accept
hmm
the
hmm
result, in terms of not being punishingly self-critical.
hmm
And but at the same time, so that's one part of it. At the same time, I always look at everything analytically, and treat it as a learning opportunity.
hmm
And
hmm
so those string charts for Corey,
hmm
I can listen to that,
hmm
and I can say, sounds pretty
hmm
good.
hmm
There's nothing that makes me cringe. which is,
Do you know what?
but
That is the goal. That is
that's
the
pretty
goal.
good.
Can I listen to my whole album and not cringe at
And
any
not cringe.
moment?
Yeah, there's not
That
any
is actually
cringing
the
going
goal.
on. Yeah, there's not any cringing. But I go, well, I could have tried. I don't know.
Yeah,
Could have a
yeah,
lot of times.
yeah.
A lot of times I could have done that.
Tweaking.
I could have done that. I don't know if that would have been any better.
Yeah.
Um,
It's like
you
tweak
know,
here, tweak there.
with that album, I actually called Rick Wilkins up, and I talked to Rick a bit, and asked him to send me a couple of scores of some
Mm,
of his scores,
right.
just to take a look at some things that I heard in his writing, and I
Yeah.
wasn't really sure what was going on,
Right.
and so I took the look, and I'll admit I flat out stole a couple of
Mm-hmm.
ideas from Rick, and he probably got them from somebody else,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
I've got no compunction about
No.
taking an idea from someone like Rick Wilkins or Johnny Mandel or whoever it
No.
is.
No.
Um,
We all
I
do
wish I
it.
got
That's part of the process. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I wish I got to do it a little more. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
if it's 5 or 10 years in between writing a string project, it's hard to
Mm-hmm.
remember what worked the last time. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but it's all music. And as Rick Wilkins told me, he said, "It's music. You know how music goes. He said, just figure. I don't know if I probably told you this. He said, just figure out what you want it to sound like, and then write that down.
That's advice that Tom Sesniak gave me. I'm sure you've worked with Tom.
Oh, many times.
Yeah, many times.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, it's that simple, eh?
Well, and you know
Like,
what,
oh,
Amanda?
yeah.
It's that's the part that I was that's the part I was skipping. I was so anxious to sharpen those pencils and start doing something that I was missing the part at the beginning where you just sit there for a few hours and just really kind of like just daydream about what you want, what you want to happen at the end. Because once you get an idea where you're going, then if I want to go there, you go, well, I can take the old highway or I can take this, or whatever. You're going to get there eventually. But if you don't know where you're going, you're just spinning your wheels, right? And I was doing a lot of wheel spinning before I learned, the process of working out, working out a structure and getting some kind of sense of an overall arc of the story before I start filling in all the details. And that's the same in crafting a legal argument. You got to be very clear about what the what's the point? Where are you going with this? You're gonna what they say. You tell the judge what you're going to tell them. You tell them the thing that you're telling them, and then you tell them why you told them. And it's you're really it's really point driven. You're trying to make that point. So when you're writing an arrangement, what's the point? Well, what's the key takeaway from this particular
100%.
chart?
Yeah.
So
fascinating. Yeah.
And thanks for sharing all that, Phil. And I have to admit, hearing you say that, in the past you've been so hard on yourself and you've had to work through how to, to work on that is sort of comforting for, someone like me. And I'm sure many other people listening, everyone sort of deals with that. And it's actually kind of nice to hear that someone like yourself deals with that too, and get that advice. So thanks for sharing that. And speaking of law, that's our next question. Of course, you're back on the West Coast in Qualicum, as we already mentioned, and you have your own law practice, and you're a lawyer now. Can you tell us a little bit about what drew you to that career? I don't want to say career change, just a career add-on, I suppose.
Well, it is largely a change, although I'm still doing music quite a bit. Actually, I'm surprised at how I've been able to sort of keep my toe in the pool as far as being a musician goes. I had been living out on the West Coast for about 10 years after moving away from Toronto. And as you know, because we worked together a lot over that period and doing the music camps and touring and recording and everything else, had kept pretty busy. But the travel was getting to be a grind. I was feeling guiltier and guiltier about my carbon footprint. But the touring was tough, and I felt like I was feeling a little Groundhog Day-ish, playing the same festivals, the same clubs, and playing the same venues, and I was still having fun, but for me personally, I was finding like the spark had gone out of it to some degree for whatever reason, and I felt like I needed a change. I didn't want to, what do they say in sports? I just play out the string. I just didn't want to coast for another 20 years or 25 years on whatever reputation I had built up, and I thought there are so many musicians out there that are so enthusiastic, have so much to bring to the table. I don't feel, is it even responsible for me to be taking up a spot anymore? So I did a lot of soul searching, and the only other thing I'd ever thought about really doing professionally, well, there was two things. One of them was being a cook, and the other one was being a lawyer. And 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 when I read Kitchen Confidential, it seemed that there were probably at least a couple of good reasons why I should stay out of being a
Stay away
professional
from
chef. and and so I was left with law. Although Dave Dunlop said, "Well, you skipped cab driving," but but so I was left with the law, and and I didn't know how practical that was. I hadn't been to university before, so I didn't have an undergrad, obviously, and I didn't know if you could go straight into law school. So I started doing what I do. My motto is, well, when in doubt, ask an expert. And so I called up Joel Backen. Do you know Joel?
I've definitely heard of Joel. He's a famous lawyer.
So
Yeah.
Joel's a professor of law at UBC and a very good jazz guitarist. And
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, he's a really good musician, and I've known the Backen family. Joel's brother Mike is a really great drummer, and his cousin Johnny is an old friend of mine who lives in Toronto. And I had coffee with Joel and asked him if that was a possible thing, and he said that it was possible, but very difficult to go straight into law school without an undergrad. And I only heard the possible part, or I chose to. So then I applied myself to the process of getting into law school, and it was very difficult. But I won't bore you with all the details. Ultimately, I ended up getting accepted into law school, and went through the 3 years of school. I articled for a year, and then wrote we have like a 10-week course in British Columbia called the Professional Legal Training Course, and at the end of that you write a couple of big exams, and then if you pass those exams you get called to the bar of British Columbia. So I became a lawyer officially in December of 2018.
Congrats.
Amazing.
Yeah. Really amazing.
It is really amazing. I think one of the things that stands out about you is just your ability to have an idea for something and see it through to fruition. Like, you're very good at taking the idea and making the thing happen for yourself, whether it's an album of string for Mark Fewer or and it's just, you just find those people who can help you do it. You ask the right questions, you do the research, you figure out, when you run into a challenge or problem, you probably just, okay, I'm going to need to just find the answer to this question or deal with this challenge here. And it's just so inspiring. Like this story is so inspiring I'm sure for everybody watching today, because you can basically, you set your mind to something and you can make it happen, and you just have to start asking questions and then do the work to make it happen. So it's pretty amazing.
Well, I saw people do that when I was young. My mother was like that. She was unbelievable. She would say, "Oh, well, the town needs tennis courts," and then the next thing you know, there were tennis courts, and you go, "Well, how did that happen?" Well, she went to the provincial government and got money, went to the Rotary and got money, went to the town and got money, got somebody to donate, make a donation in kind to do the thing, and
wow,
and she did all sorts of stuff like that. And another person that was crazy good at doing stuff like that was Hugh Fraser.
Yeah.
I mean, he just did stuff that, well, you can't do that. Okay, really?
Yeah.
Let me show you. Let me show you why you're wrong about that. Yeah. And so that was those are two people that come to mind as being examples of why you you shouldn't take no for an answer necessarily. I mean, sometimes it's not possible, and you go, okay, well, maybe that wasn't a good idea.
Hmm.
And for every idea that's crazy idea, like going to law school or making a record with 40 musicians or starting a music camp, that actually happened. I mean, I had like probably 500 other ideas that, I mean,
Yeah.
my
Right.
Teresa would find it laughable, the idea that I see things through to the end.
We just see the stuff that actually manifests, I guess.
Yeah, well, I'm able to see some
Yeah.
things through to the
Yeah.
end, and I think at a certain point you kind of parse out the value of the idea, and you go, well, this is okay. This is something that is worth seeing through,
Mm.
and you do, like you say, Jody, you do what you need to do to get it across the finish line
Mhm.
because you see the value of it, and
Mhm.
definitely law school is like that because I've felt. Um, a lot of the time, way too old, way too dumb, and way too
Mm.
tired to really
Mm.
get it finished. Because I was,
Mhm.
I'm competing on a curved grade basis with,
Mm.
90 really really smart 23-year-olds
Mhm.
and who probably
Mm.
graduated at the top of their class in their whatever undergrad they took, and I felt outgunned a lot of the time, but you persevere, and let's face it, even to be able to be in a position to be going to law school is such a privilege
Yeah.
that I just looked at it like that and go, well, I can't believe I get this opportunity to do
Right.
this, and this is at this stage of my life, and then at the end of it, maybe even have a career doing it, and thankfully, it's something I really enjoy. So.
Well, can we just segue toward this recent court case that you have been working on? Because to me, all this story to get to this point, and then you struggle through, all the things you struggle through when you're vulnerably in a new environment, as you say, with people that you're like, whoa, I'm a little fish out of water here, and I didn't go the same, the pathway to get to this point wasn't the same as my schoolmates, and I'm older doing this and this seems so strange. And then you have to do more testing, and then you move back, and then you have to establish your firm and figure out what direction you want to go as a lawyer, I'm sure. So, but then recently, of course, out here on the West Coast, there's been so much news about the Fairy Creek blockade, and then we found out recently that you were part of the law team that was arguing the case in court. So, can you speak a little bit about that? And then what the other question I have around that is, how has it that all of this prior lawyer experience in the art world and the creativity world and the music world, how have the lessons you've learned through that process served you in this moment? Um, yeah, and what characteristics did you develop that have helped you as a lawyer that maybe surprised you, or maybe that was just a neat, like, oh wow, I actually am able to do this because of my prior experience in this other thing. Can you speak to those two things?
So the Fairy Creek, I got involved with that in the same way I get involved in lots of other things, which is by a fluke. I was in court in Ucluelet about 3 years ago when I was articling, and I heard a lawyer making a very what I thought was a really great argument about a case out there, and after court was done, or when we broke for lunch, I introduced myself to that lawyer and said how much I appreciated what he had to say, and we exchanged phone numbers, and we kept in touch. And it turned out that he's a very prominent environmental lawyer in BC here. Um, I've done lots of big cases, and he asked me if I was interested in getting involved and putting my name forward to be part of the essentially like a legal aid roster for environmental law, and I was very interested, and the timing was quite remarkable in that I literally was just submitting my name to be considered to be part of this roster when the people who were involved in the Fairy Creek were looking for a lawyer, and we connected. And so back in February of this year, I got involved with three clients who are. One of them is Elder Bill Jones, who's a Patchett First Nation member who's been a figurehead of the protest, and then two other people. And we went to court on the first injunction hearing, and it's been a big part of my law practice ever since then. So when the injunction was due to expire, and the Teal Cedar applied to have it extended, we had a 4-day court hearing, and it was to do with that. It was also to do with the nature of the RCMP enforcement, and so the Attorney General of Canada was there representing the RCMP. Provincial government was there representing the Ministry of Forests, and then various other respondents, of which I was one of three lawyers, myself and Patrick Canning and another lawyer called Charlotte Chamberlain. We were all representing these three clients, and we made our argument. And then on the 28th of September, the judge came down with his ruling, which basically that allowed the injunction to lapse. So it was a significant decision that has attracted an incredible amount of interest around the world, because it's extremely rare in the context of these kinds of resource industry injunction law. This decision is significant and brings issues to the table that have been argued before and have received attention from the courts before, but the way it was framed and the amount of weight that was given to things like the behavior of the police, and it's kind of a technical thing, but the availability of an alternative remedy to the plaintiff, which means that the court was saying that there doesn't need to be an injunction because the police could just enforce the law the way they would enforce any other law. They could go and arrest somebody for blocking the road. That's a breach of the Highways Act or the Criminal Code.
Mhm.
You don't need to have a court order in place to do that. And so he was suggesting that that's what the police should be doing, and the Crown should be prosecuting it, and that the civil courts should not be dragged into that argument. So that's kind of my read on the decision. But of course, it's as I say, it's attracted a lot of interest and be subject to appeal, and it's far from being put to bed. I'll say that.
So
but quite an interesting for kind of my first crack at doing an environmental case. It kind of landed on a big one.
Everything's really big with you all the time, Phil. Like nothing is ever just small and quiet. It's like everything you're involved with is always becomes like it's so interesting. It's like very for some reason you always land in these like situations that are transformative in some ways, and are big, big events or big projects or big court cases. So that's just where you're supposed to roll, my friend. You're supposed to be a leader and a lighthouse for a lot of people in whatever you decide to do, I suppose.
Maybe. I think really, I have to say that all the opportunities, or any of these things that seem like big doings or big projects or whatever, they're all traceable to the same philosophy that I have, which is to stay open to things, and don't try to game the system. Like don't try to figure out who's gonna do something for you, or just try to be open to stuff. Just try to experience stuff and meet the people that seem interesting, and not the people that maybe the best position to help you move
Yeah.
up a rung on the ladder, because anytime I've tried to do that, it just never really goes anywhere, because it's pretty transparent that you're just trying to ingratiate yourself to somebody because they're in a position to do something for you, and
Yeah.
that never has any legs whatsoever. All the interesting things that have happened in my career have been as a result of just being open to and like making contact with people that I thought were interesting and had something interesting to say, or were doing something
Mm,
cool. I thought, what are you doing there? How do you do that? And
mm,
and so the relationships that you get involved with by those sorts of expressions of interest or respect or curiosity, those are the
mm.
ones. Those are the ones that lead to interesting and maybe things that seem like big things, because those are the ones that allow you to really engage with what's fundamental to your own principles and your own values, right? So
Yeah.
so
Oh,
that's
Phil
that's where
Dwyer, we
you,
love you.
if you can engage with what's core to
Hmm.
yourself, then it's going to be big, because you'll
Hmm.
be able to
Hmm.
bring everything to the table. So
Oh my gosh.
yeah.
This is like, I think, the perfect place to put a pin in this piece. Uh, yeah, I think Amanda and if I can speak on behalf of Amanda, we both look at you as a lighthouse to do exactly what you just described. Exactly what, and we've talked a lot about this and how special you have been in our life to model and model this. You know, you're making choices that are both heart-centered, about wellness too, like what feels good to you, but you're also still contributing through your art and through your advocacy and through again, your this idea of curiosity and relationship to yourself, to the environment we live in, to your community, to the greater community, and your activism and who you are is and your principles, as you say, gives you the lights up the path you're supposed to take. And sometimes it may seem like a very crazy path on paper, but you're just intuitively following that path that you're ready to take. You're listening in. So I just have to just thank you for that. I think, um, as you say, a lot of people do follow the shiny thing, or the thing they feel they should be doing, or the person they should be hanging out with or should be working with. But you've always kind of said, no, these are the people that mean something to me. I remember just watching your and Dawn's relationship. Yes, you guys are both amazing players, but you love each other. You're like, this is like, you love each other, you and Dawn Thompson. So, I mean, just looking at those kind of relationships that you have formed over the years with people. And anyway, it's just amazing to have you here to talk about all this. And we're going to wind this up. We're actually a little over time, but we usually do a speed round. And so this is like a one sentence answer kind of speed round. And we do this with all of our guests. So do you mind if we whip through this right now, and then we'll wrap it up for today?
Yeah.
Because you got more stuff to do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Suitcases to
You
win.
got to write some affidavits and
Yeah, I gotta
and then
draft some
go host.
affidavits. Yeah.
Yes, you got to go draft some affidavits.
Yeah.
All right.
So
We'll make this speedy. Speed round. All right. So the first question is, what is your favorite venue to play in?
You know what? I love playing at Frankie's in Vancouver.
uh,
I love playing at Frankie's, but I also would also be remiss in not mentioning the Rex in
mm,
Toronto, because I love playing there. Uh, Historically, in terms of venues that aren't around anymore, the classical joint in
Vancouver.
Vancouver and the Montreal Bistro in Toronto were two
Mm,
that I really loved.
special places.
Yeah.
So when you start writing, what's your favorite time of day to do that?
First thing in the morning,
Hmm.
put on a pot of coffee, sharpen 10 pencils, turn all the phones off,
Yeah.
and just start going. And then usually by about halfway through day 3, I start writing something that's worth
Mm,
saving. Yeah.
hmm. Hmm.
So if you weren't a musician or lawyer, what would you be interested in doing?
Well, I'd love to be a chef. I don't know if I would be. I don't know how good I would be at it. I seem to have kind of maxed out my potential, but I think that I would be. I would love to pursue that.
Hmm. Okay, here's one. If you were going to invite someone over for dinner, anyone from history, who would that be? And what would you eat?
Um, I think I would have former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court Brian Dixon over for dinner.
What would you serve him?
I would get Peter Zambri to cater it.
Ah, whatever Peter wanted to bring.
Whatever Peter wanted to make would be fine with me because that's how I roll with Peter, and he would do something amazing, I'm sure. So,
That's
but
amazing.
I just find Chief Justice Dixon to be a remarkable, interesting person, and coincidentally, Joel Bakken was his law clerk. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
interesting. Interesting.
Our final question is, what would be one bit of advice that you would say to your 18-year-old self?
Don't do it.
Yeah, we'll leave that open-ended.
Okay.
You can infer all sorts of things with that one. But
Amazing.
all part of the journey. Oh my
It's
gosh.
all part of the journey. Yeah,
All
yeah.
part of the story.
That's right.
The
Whatever it took,
amazing story.
whatever it took to get where we are today, it is what it is, and
It
it's
is what it is.
Yeah.
no complaints.
It's a jungle gym, not a ladder.
As Shirley Horn would say, no complaints, no regrets.
No complaints,
Yeah.
no regrets.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Blessings and thanks to all of it. Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Phil. There's so many nuggets of great advice in this talk. So thanks for sharing with us and with the people tuning in. And yeah, thanks for being here.
Well, it was great to see you both.
Thank you
I hope
so
to see you. I
much.
hope that it'll be in person next time.
I hope
Yes.
so. Hopefully, maybe we'll all get to play together soon at some point.
Yes.
So when
All
we can
right.
pull you away from your desk and your writing.
Affidavits.
Actually, I will be seeing you when we come out with triology in
April.
April. So
Yeah,
if not before
looking-
then, that'll be fantastic. So
I better start
all
practicing.
right.
Amazing.
Okay.
Well, thank you again,
You
and
too.
thanks to everyone who
Thanks,
tuned
everybody.
in.
Have an
Um,
awesome day.
Yes, have an awesome rest of the
Everyone
weekend.
be well, and we'll see you soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.